Welcome to the Scientist with Heart Podcast, my open diary of academic life. This is a space where I share my personal thoughts and reflections on research, teaching, and university life. These are my own opinions, and the aim is to spark discussion, exchange perspectives, and gather insights from others navigating the academic roller coaster at the bench and in the lecture hall. Why should we teach people carefully how to work in the lab? Let me explain what I mean with this and then answer the question for you. When a new scientist first tries to do an experiment, they should not start with a big complicated project, a lot of samples. It's better to start small, and everyone knows that. Using only 2 or 3 simple test samples at first to learn about the new experimental workflow, the new protocol. Always include a positive, when it's possible, both positive and negative control, and just test the system. See if it really works. And this way, one can see what success and failure are supposed to look like. One can practice the steps and learn the rules and make the first mistakes. Mistakes are very okay at this stage of learning because, in fact, one should make mistakes. That's how we learn. That's why we understand and how we can understand the process deeply. And we can repeat then the controls and test it properly. And then it's very robust. And then slowly adding in more and more samples and expanding on the sample size. Why is this important and why am I even talking about it? Because without this small, careful start, many students jump into large projects without knowing how to handle them, and the experiments fail. And then they do not just waste time, but they don't learn the skill they need to become better in, and also they waste a lot of money. So they waste time and they waste money. And unfortunately, I have seen this happening over and over again and again for more than a decade in every lab that I have been in, no matter how experienced the lab leader was. It just keeps happening. If we talk about money and resources, science is definitely very expensive. Experiments use materials, machines, chemicals, and a lot of waste is produced. And all this money comes from society, from taxes, from research funds, and still, wherever the money comes from, someone pays for it. So every failed experiment, and I do not mean negative data, I mean failed experiments where you cannot conclude from, failed experiments because a student did not fully understand the protocol, because the hands weren't trained yet. Every failed experiment is not only frustrating, it is wasted time and money that could have gone into a real discovery. Of course, sometimes experiments fail no matter what, and that's normal because you have to learn from it, but it's good if it's a negative experiment so you can conclude from it. And there is a big difference between an experiment that fails. Sometimes experiments also don't work out because they are not designed in a way to answer the question, but then you learn from it. It's a problem if it's failing because of the poor training in the basics. And this wasted time, let me tell you, it really adds up. In more than a decade in labs, I have seen countless of beginners that failed experiments, and it's happening all around the world. So if we would count up and calculate what the total loss of all of these decades of wasted research time is, we would be surprised. And science already takes years and years before we can even make new discoveries that help society, health, or our lives. So throwing away more time by skipping proper training in the beginning is a huge problem. So here I have a suggestion, a solution, my own solution. It is that every group leader should be very strict and very clear in the beginning of how students must show that they can repeat the basic controls, not once, but twice, several times, as much as necessary before moving on to the real samples and concluding from them. At first, just execute the protocol using controls, reproducing what has been done before, or establishing a robust protocol. And if you fail for some reason, and if it's not robust, then try again. And there should be no shame in that, because this is the way we learn. Only when the controls look perfect and if it's reproducible and robust, it means that they produce the expected repeated result, and it should be only then that more samples are added. And this takes time. But then if we look at the timeline of a PhD thesis, for example, how much time does it take? Maybe 2 or 3 weeks? This is absolutely worth it, because after 1 month of careful training in such a protocol or method, the student will now be completely prepared for the 3 to 5 years of PhD work. And this type of experiment will work in a robust way. You can start using unknown samples, and we can trust that the results are technically reliable and meaningful. I had to learn this lesson myself when I was younger, and I understand very well the urge to run big experiments fast, include many samples, but often nothing works in the beginning. How should it also? I got frustrated and I wasted months, but then I forced myself going back to the basics. So I treated myself like that, and I said, this is not the way how it's going. And I just ran the tests with positive, negative controls, gave me the time to practice, and then started over. And since then, I wish that every lab trained their new students this way, because right now it is very common for new PhD students to often jump into huge complex experimental setups that take 5 whole days and have hundreds of little steps, by the way, that no one really explains in the protocol. So many things are not described with words, how you do that, so you have to practice a little. And of course, they crash and fail. I say instead, let's spend a month practicing, or 2 weeks or a week or however long it takes, repeat. Be sure that these long experiments are repeated with controls and that every step is under control. And this is not just about saving money here. It's also about creating an atmosphere in the lab where students learn instead of feeling crushed when they make mistakes. So when students keep failing because they weren't trained right, or they didn't get the time to train themselves because they weren't aware that this is a thing, the whole lab culture suffers. Students get frustrated and PIs get stressed because they don't know what really went wrong, because they are not standing next to the student. They just discuss why things might not have worked, and the motivation also disappears. And these students often started with the best attitude, full of energy, open to work hard and wanting to succeed. And that's also the driver for including a lot of samples right from the beginning. But if the system pushes them too fast and supports this attitude of overdoing, overachieving, well, then it falls apart and it feels terrible for everyone. That's why I strongly argue for back to basics. Every new person in the lab, and that might be a bachelor student, a master student, a PhD student, and me at age 43 joining a new lab environment, we should first test the basics, run a simple gel, do a simple blot with the controls, check how the equipment works, might be different companies, different setups, learn where chemicals are stored, make sure the hands, the mind, and the routine are smooth before moving to the real unknown samples. And this is not about being stupid. It's about respecting the craft and building a strong foundation in any new lab. And I have noticed that labs with less money often already work this way because they have to. They cannot afford to waste materials. They think carefully about every experiment. And I wish this mindset were everywhere. And in the end, careful training saves time, although it seems like it takes too much time in the beginning. But it saves time in the long run, and it saves so much money, and also it saves us frustration. It produces real, reliable data that actually helps science to move forward. I would love to hear your experiences with this, and how is it organized in your lab? Is there a strict training routine in the beginning when someone starts, or is it everyone runs free, figure it out themselves? Is there a system in place, or what's the culture? What's the attitude? Looking back, do you think a more structured training might have helped you in the beginning of the phase that you're in now? And yeah, what are your thoughts on this? I'm curious how you feel about this. And sometimes only afterwards, in hindsight, we realize what might have worked better. But I'm curious about the people actually in those phases, PhD, senior PhD, very young postdocs. What's your opinion about that? And how do you wish you were educated about this? Let me know.